At midnight, the clanging of heavy locks echoed through Ouagadougou Central Prison. President Ibrahim Traoré stood before a cell no visitor dared approach. Inside, a young woman, eyes hollow but defiant, had already accepted she would die forgotten, framed for a crime she never committed, sentenced by a corrupt judge, her cries silenced. But tonight was different. Traoré's voice broke the night. Open this cell now. The guard's face turned pale, his knees buckling as he realized who stood before him and what he demanded. But why was she framed? And what does Traoré know that terrified the system itself? Join us on Courageous Voices for a tale of midnight justice that will shock you to your core. The iron gates groaned as they slid open, slicing through the heavy silence of Ouagadougou Central Prison. Midnight had long claimed the city, but tonight the stillness fractured under the weight of unexpected footsteps. Guards huddled in the dim light, exchanging uneasy glances. Nobody, not even the warden, visited at this hour, yet here he was, President Ibrahim Traoré himself, flanked by only two aides, eyes steeled with unspoken purpose. His convoy had slipped past protocols, orders pre-cleared from the very top. No sirens, no cameras, only intent. The senior guard, Captain Dwamba, scrambled from his office, pulling his jacket on with trembling hands. Traoré's reputation preceded him, decisive, fearless, but rarely impulsive. Whatever brought him here at this hour was nothing ordinary. Before Dwamba could ask, the president's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Take me to prisoner 47. The room chilled, even the youngest guard stiffened. Prisoner 47 was no ordinary inmate. She was a ghost, confined deeper than the others, kept out of public record. Whispers haunted the halls, framed, cursed, or damned. Nobody knew, yet Traoré knew, and he wasn't here for rumors. As they made their way through corridors veiled in shadows, the guards hesitated near her block. Traoré turned, gaze burning. Unlock it, he commanded reluctantly. The key twisted, the door creaked open, revealing a woman sitting perfectly still in the darkness. Samira Kabore did not flinch, did not speak. Her eyes, hollow yet quietly defiant, met his without fear, without breaking his stare. Traoré uttered words that made even the toughest guard stagger. This ends tonight. What secret did they bury so deep that only midnight justice could unearth it? Stay with Courageous Voices to find out. Samira Kabore sat in the farthest corner of her cell, knees drawn close, as though shielding herself from a world that had long since abandoned her. The flickering bulb above barely reached her face, yet her eyes glowed with quiet defiance. Even in the gloom, once, those eyes had lit up television screens across Burkina Faso. At just 27, Samira had become a rising star in journalism, fearless, sharp, and unbending. She chased corruption like a storm, exposing shadowy mining deals and backdoor government bribes that robbed villages of land and hope. But truth, she learned too late. As enemies, her downfall came swiftly and without mercy. After a deadly explosion tore through a government building during a tense protest, an explosion that claimed innocent lives, the blame fell on her like a hammer. The narrative was easy. She had written scathing articles, led marches, and angered the elite. A corrupt judge, Delma Sori, made the case stick like tar. Witnesses bribed, evidence planted, in a courtroom suffocated by power. Her voice was crushed. Life imprisonment, no appeal, no mercy. The early months in prison shattered her spirit. She screamed, she wept, she begged, but with each passing day, isolation hollowed her out. Letters vanished, visitors denied, guards silenced her with indifference and cruelty. Over time, she stopped speaking altogether, not because she gave up, but because words were useless in a world deaf to truth. Yet, as Traoré stood before her now, she didn't rise or recoil, she only stared. There was no trust left to offer, no expectation left to hold. She was broken in every way except the part that mattered, the part that refused, even in silence, to be defeated. The palace was unusually quiet when Traoré locked himself in his private office days before his midnight visit. He had dismissed his ministers with polite urgency and silenced the ever-curious media. Only two trusted aides knew why. Before him lay a thin, unmarked dossier, delivered quietly by an intelligence operative who preferred shadows to the spotlight. It had arrived late at night, and what it contained shook Traoré more than any foreign threat or military provocation. The file was a map of betrayal. Inside were transcripts of hidden recordings, bank slips, and a chain of emails tracing back to Minister Issa Tambara, the very man responsible for overseeing foreign investment in Burkina Faso. The puzzle pieces formed an ugly picture. Foreign contractors, desperate to exploit the nation's untouched minerals, had faced fierce opposition from Samira Kabore. Her articles had exposed backdoor deals that robbed communities blind. When pressure mounted and protests surged, the explosion happened, conveniently erasing their loudest critic while terrifying dissent into silence. The final blow came with the judge. Delmas Sori, once thought to be impartial, was neck-deep in bribes. His judgment against Samira had been pre-written. Witnesses were coached, evidence fabricated. Traoré read every page, face tightening with rage and disbelief. Justice, the very thing he had sworn to defend, had been sold like cheap goods in a market stall. By dawn, the decision had been made. This would not pass quietly. No press conference, no political theater. Some stains couldn't be cleaned publicly, they had to be burned away in darkness. Traoré donned his coat and ordered his driver to prepare for a destination he never expected to see. He was going to face the forgotten prisoner himself, and this time, the state would not look away. It began with rivers running dry. Samira Kabore had been the only journalist bold enough to venture into the dust-choked villages of Kulpalogo, where families once thrived off the land. She listened as mothers wept over poisoned wells and farmers held up cracked hands, victims of ruthless foreign mining operations that left nothing but scars behind. Samira's articles ignited a firestorm. She named names, contractors with foreign ties, local middlemen, and the puppet master behind it all, Minister Issa Tambara. Her words spread like wildfire, turning quiet suffering into angry marches in Ouagadougou. For the first time in years, the people's voices grew louder than the politicians. That's when Tambara struck back. Weeks after Samira published leaked contracts exposing illegal land seizures, an explosion ripped through a government building during a heated protest. The timing was perfect, too perfect. Overnight, blame fell on the journalist who dared defy power. The state claimed Samira's exposé had incited extremists. They paraded evidence on television, a forged email, fabricated recordings, even a paid witness who swore Samira had connections to subversive groups. She never stood a chance. Hauled into court like a symbol of chaos, she faced Judge Delmas Sori, a man whose hands were dirted long before her trial began. He denied every motion, dismissed key witnesses, and offered her no defense. Within days, she was sentenced to life without parole. Cameras captured her stunned silence as he read the verdict, though they cut away before showing Tambara's smirk in the courtroom gallery. As Samira disappeared into the prison shadows, the powerful celebrated. Their critic was gone, the scandal buried. Yet, what they did not know was that truth, though crushed, has a habit of breathing beneath rubble. And tonight, justice had come knocking. Musa Bako had only worn the uniform for 6 months, yet it already hung heavy on his shoulders. Unlike the others, hardened by years of guarding men and women long forgotten by society, Musa still believed in fairness, or at least he had until he was assigned to Blocky. That was where prisoner 47 lived or existed. Orders about her were strict and cold. No visitors, no letters, no voices raised near her door. She was more myth than inmate, a silent warning to anyone who thought justice was blind. When President Traoré stepped into the prison that night, Musa's world tilted. The leader of the nation did not belong here among rusted bars and broken spirits. The guards whispered nervously as Traoré approached, but it was Musa who found himself face to face with the president when they reached the checkpoint for Samira's cell. The young guard's throat tightened. He stood straighter, yet his palms sweated. Traoré's voice was calm, yet unmistakably fierce. Unlock her cell now. Musa hesitated, not out of disobedience, but feared. Sir, he managed, she's not allowed visitors, even letters. They're destroyed before they reach her. His words hung in the air, heavy with quiet shame. He knew what he was saying wasn't lawful, But it was how things had always been. Prisoners like her weren't meant to speak or be heard again. Traoré's eyes darkened, the weight of injustice pressed into the young guard's chest like a vice. Do you know why she is here? The president asked softly. Moussa shook his head. Then you don't know enough to deny me. Without raising his voice, Traoré made the choice clear. Moussa swallowed hard, heart pounding. Moments later, the heavy keys clanged, and history's door creaked open. The cell door groaned as it swung shut behind Traoré, sealing him inside with a woman who had been buried alive in silence. Samira did not move. Her face, gaunt and emotionless, stayed turned to the cracked wall as though his presence was just another ghost passing through. Traoré sat down slowly on the cold floor, discarding every barrier of status and power. He did not speak as a president, but as a man carrying the weight of a nation's sins. Minutes passed before his voice cut through the still air. They framed you, Samira. I have seen the truth. Her head turned slightly, suspicion flickering across hollow eyes. She said nothing. Words had long been currency too costly to spend. Traoré reached into his coat, sliding a thin file across the dusty ground. It stopped at her knees. Slowly, Samira's hands, frail but steady, picked it up. Inside were copies of forged documents, bank transfers, transcripts, even photographs, names she knew, deals she suspected, and the smoking gun Issa Tambara's signature authorizing a payment just days before the deadly explosion. Her fingers trembled as she turned each page, lips parting in disbelief. She pressed her palm to her mouth, trying to contain something unfamiliar. It wasn't rage, it wasn't grief, it was hope, terrifying and raw. Traoré's voice softened, heavy with regret. On behalf of this nation and every coward who let this happen, I am sorry. The dam inside her shattered. Samira's composure dissolved as sobs racked her body, not cries of defeat, but of long-suffocated faith breaking free. She wept until no tears remained, gripping the file like a lifeline. For the first time in years, she believed someone had finally heard her scream. The car ride back from the prison was silent, but Traoré's phone lit up before dawn. One call after another. Names that usually spoke in measured tones now hissed with urgent, thinly veiled threats. The first was a senior cabinet minister. Mr. President, he began, his voice tight, what you were doing, it's reckless. Let sleeping dogs lie. Moments later came a call from a high-ranking military advisor, more blunt, with respect. Sir, freeing her will send shock waves. Foreign contractors will pull out. Diplomats are already nervous. This isn't just about justice anymore. Traoré listened without interrupting. They were right about one thing. Samira's release would rip open old wounds the powerful had spent years stitching shut with dirty money and quiet deals. Burkina Faso's fragile alliances, especially with foreign investors, hung by a thread. Every voice on the line pressed him toward the same conclusion: protect stability, preserve image, avoid chaos, let her rot. He sat in his office, curtains drawn tight as the voices echoed in his head. He thought of the villages Samira once defended, of poisoned rivers and silenced mothers. He thought of the young woman in the cell who no longer believed in justice until tonight, and finally, he thought of the oath he had taken to serve the people, not the powerful. Traoré stood slowly, the decision weighing heavy yet resolute. Politics had always been a game of sacrifice, but tonight, he refused to sacrifice truth. He called his aides and spoke calmly with finality. Prepare the order. She walks free by sunrise. In that moment, the president of Burkina Faso chose not safety, not diplomacy, but a path riddled with peril. Justice, he knew, would make him enemies, but silence would make him a traitor. The prison seemed colder than before, as if it sensed that something unnatural was about to unfold. Moussa Bako stood rigid near Samira's cell, clutching the heavy key in his trembling hand. Orders were everything here, protocol was scripture. And what Traoré demanded now would shatter all of it. No prisoner from Bloc E ever walked free. That was the unspoken rule carved deep into the walls and minds of every guard who patrolled its haunted halls. But Traoré wasn't negotiating. Open it, he said, voice low, but loaded with finality. Moussa swallowed hard, his lips cracking as he stammered, Sir, with all due respect, I could lose my post. There are procedures. Traoré stepped forward, his gaze stripping away every layer of Musa's fear. "You're afraid of breaking rules written by corrupt men. Look at her." He gestured toward Samira, who stood silently behind the bars, her face unreadable yet full of silent hope. "You're afraid of disobeying monsters," Traoré continued, voice now sharpened to a blade. "But have you thought about who you'll answer to when history looks back? You will not answer to Tambora, not to Sori, not to any coward hiding behind lawbooks soaked in blood. You will answer to the people, and they will remember who stood for right, and who looked away." Musa's breath hitched, the words struck deeper than any threat could. His legs weakened, knees nearly buckling under the moral weight crushing him. For a moment, the young guard seemed paralyzed between duty and conscience. Then something broke. With shaking fingers, he slid the key into the lock. The door gave way with a metallic gasp, as though the prison itself protested. Samira stepped forward slowly, tasting freedom in the air. Musa whispered, voice cracking, "Go." The heavy gates of Ouagadougou Central groaned one final time as they swung open, but this time, they did not swallow dreams, they released them. Samira Kabore stepped into the cool night barefoot, clutching nothing but the thin prison shawl draped around her frail shoulders. The city before her was silent, unaware that history had just shifted in the shadows. Traoré walked beside her, no cameras, no applause, only the hum of crickets and the faint glow of street lamps guiding their path. Not a word passed between them, yet something deep and sacred echoed louder than speeches. She was no longer forgotten. By sunrise, justice, long choked by power, roared awake. News broke before breakfast. Judge Delma Sori was pulled from his estate, handcuffed in front of a dozen flashing lenses. Hours later, Issa Tambora was dragged from his private jet on the runway, face drained of color. The world, once comfortable in its indifference, stared wide-eyed as Burkina Faso began cleaning its own house. By noon, international media exploded with polarized fury. Western outlets speculated whether Traoré had crossed a line, branding his midnight justice as dangerous and authoritarian. Human rights groups, many who had ignored Samira's imprisonment, now argued over the method of her release rather than its cause. Yet, for every critic abroad, there were millions back home whose hearts thundered with pride. In dusty villages and crowded cities alike, whispers became cheers. Traoré had done what no other dared. He had not just spoken of justice, he had delivered it. As Samira disappeared into quiet safety, Traoré faced the weight of divided worlds. To some, he was a tyrant; to others, a hero reborn. But in his heart, only one truth mattered. Tonight, the forgotten had been seen. Weeks passed, the headlines slowly faded, as headlines always do. Samira Kabore, the woman whose name had once been etched in courtroom indictments and scrolled on protest banners, now chose silence over spectacle. She refused interviews, declined invitations, and vanished into a small rented home on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. There, she tended a modest garden, and found solace in the rhythm of ordinary life. The world wanted a symbol, but she craved something simpler, to be whole again, away from flashing cameras and hungry narratives. Traoré respected her wish. He too knew the weight of being made into something people used, hero or villain, depending on the day. Still, one evening under the cover of dusk, he arrived quietly at her gate. No convoy, no guards, just the man who had once stood in her darkest hour. Samira opened the door, surprised but calm. They sat outside beneath a pale sky, speaking little. There was no need for grand speeches, too much had already been said in the silence of prison walls and courtroom lies. Before leaving, Traoré stood, pausing as if searching for the right words. He looked at her, the woman who had refused to break, even when forgotten by the very nation she once served. His voice was soft, yet carried the weight of all that had happened. "Truth is lonely," he said, almost to himself. Then his eyes met hers, steady and unwavering, but undefeated. Without waiting for thanks or fanfare, he left as quietly as he came, but the silence that followed was uneasy. Rumors swirled through government halls and foreign embassies alike. Traoré had made enemies, powerful ones. The nation waited, breath held tight, wondering if his crusade against corruption would bring renewal or destroy him next. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Like to stand with justice? Comment your thoughts. Should Traoré risk everything for truth? subscribe to Courageous Voices and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next gripping story where power, courage, and morality collide. Your voice keeps stories like this alive. Join the community on Courageous Voices because truth, even when lonely, must never be silenced.